questions. I want to say, up front, that I take full responsibility for this decision.
As you have all probably already heard this week, on Wednesday, Meta laid off 13% of their workforce, which is about 11,000 employees. Today we'll be talking about a couple of different areas. One, using statistics to talk about why these layoffs are happening, including what Mark Zuckerberg has had to say in the past week or so. Number two, I want to specifically touch on the demographics of people who Meta has laid off. And finally, I want to go into the results of what has happened since Wednesday in the past couple of days, as well as what we have to look forward to moving forwards because of this major layoff for the workforce. Starting with why layoffs are currently occurring at Meta, Mark Zuckerberg claims that he's had to make some difficult changes because he predicted the growth of the company wrong. He claims at the start of COVID, the world rapidly moved online and the surge of e-commerce led to outsized revenue growth. Many people predicted that this would be a permanent acceleration that would continue even after the pandemic ended. Unfortunately, this has not been the case. Now, if we look at what has happened from the second quarter of this year to third quarter of this year, what Mark Zuckerberg has said is true. A lot of their income and revenue has not met up to expectations. So, the company reported a 4% drop in revenue for its third quarter, 27.7 billion, and this is compared to 29 billion a year earlier, and net income from 4.4 billion down to 52% from a year earlier. And since then, spending has soared by 19%, so essentially, they're spending more, but they're not getting as much income and revenue in return. In addition, as you all know, there's this big 10 billion metaverse problem where a lot of employees might not necessarily believe the vision of where the metaverse is going, but high executives, including Mark, are heavily invested into this idea and bring the metaverse into light. And one of the main reasons for this is a lot of their ad revenue is through Instagram and Facebook, and this can be restricted by companies like Apple who have ad revenue sharing. And because of this, they don't have as much control as if the metaverse were started and they started their own platform, having more control in-house. So looking at the growth of the company, we can see that there has been quite a bit of growth since the pandemic. So, the number of employees from 2021 was around 71,000, which represented a 23% growth from 2020. And in 2022, there are currently about 87,000 employees at the end of September, which is up 28% from a year ago. So there has been lots of growth since the pandemic, as Mark has said, and this 13% cut represents a cut from the increase that has happened over the past year. Now, one thing I want to note is that this is actually pretty standard to what has happened in the past and not necessarily a greater increase than what the company has experienced before. So, for example, in 2019, they made a 26% jump to 44,000, and in 2018, they made a 41% jump to 35,000 in employees. Now, in absolute terms, these last 2 years have been the largest increase in their amount of employees. But if we look at the relative increase in percentage, it has been sort of standard between what happened in the pandemic and what happened before for Meta as a company as well. So it's not just the fact that employees have increased this past year, but there have been serious sort of revenue decrease as well that has caused this layoff. And center of this is the Reality Labs, which they need to continue investing in, but it still lost $3.7 billion in the past year. So this brings me to my second point, who at Meta was laid off. So typically when layoffs occur, there's a balance between experienced engineers and new hires, because for experienced engineers, they're making more salary. So if you were to lay them off, it allows you to lay off less of the workforce to get a greater cut of the costs. However, this is not what Mark Zuckerberg is doing here. A lot of the new hires are actually being impacted by this. And if you look down through many of these LinkedIn posts, many of these new hires have been in the company for less than a week or less than 2 weeks, and some even a couple of days, and they are being laid off. So as you can see, this layoff is a little bit atypical from a traditional layoff where they're laying off more experienced engineers, because new hires are being significantly impacted. And one of the main motivations is to boost investor confidence so that the stock price will increase going from the third quarter to the fourth quarter. As soon as this was announced, Meta's stock price was boosted immediately. And keep in mind that this was done on Wednesday. And I think this was done very strategically because on Wednesday was the start of the US midterm elections. And by doing so, I think one of the rationale was perhaps they felt that by releasing the news of the layoffs on Wednesday, there would be no way that these layoffs would be bigger news than the midterm elections, so it would be buried a little bit underneath. So again, it seems like one of the main priorities going from the third to fourth quarter is not necessarily sort of the employees or the amount of employees that they keep, but to get rid of some of the new hires and the people who are less experienced so that they can run more lean and to provide investors a lot more confidence for Meta going forward. Because of this, these layoffs impact quite a diverse amount of people. For example, for the experienced engineers, they might already have a rich resume coming out from Meta and have a lot of opportunities, but for them, they need to look closely on which opportunities are currently out there, especially at this job market, and whether to wait it out for bigger companies to stop their hiring freeze or to take a little bit more risk and join a smaller company or within sort of a startup as a big executive. Now, the last group of people, the significant percentage of new hires who are impacted, so this is between 0 to 1 year's experience, and even in a lot of LinkedIn posts, we've seen that this is like for people who have only been there for like a week or less than a month. This is a significant problem, especially if you're an immigrant and are currently there under a US, or if you're in a Canadian location, a Canadian visa. Now, if you're in Canada, it's a little bit easier because for most work visas, you get 1 to 3 years to sort of find your job so that you can stay in Canada as long as you are able to find a job within that time frame. But for the US, it's usually between a month to 90 days. So for a lot of them, they may perhaps have used the chunk of that time already to find their original job at Meta. So they have maybe a month, 2 months to find a job currently before they actually have to leave the country. So this is something that significantly impacts these people with these types of visas. So I think out of the people who have gotten the most raw deal out of this is probably the people with like the least amount of experience who are on these, or if they are on these sort of visa situations where they only have a limited amount of time to find a job before they have to leave the United States. Now, Meta has said that they are offering immigration support, but a lot of ex-employees have made complaints about this, about how much they are offering the support and to what extent. Yeah, hopefully this gives you some information about the Meta layoffs upcoming. If you want me to cover a little bit more about the layoffs across a bunch of these big name companies and why this is occurring individually for each of these companies, please click a like and subscribe below so that I know to make more of this content. Talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.